So the Sahel, a region we have come back to a lot. And right now, armed forces in Mali are continuing to battle attacks from terror groups Jamaat Nasra al-Islam wal Muslimin, JNIM, which is an al-Qaeda affiliated armed group, and the Azawad Liberation Front, FLA. Attacks have been also reported in neighboring Niger, where on Sunday, the country celebrated 3 years since the patriotic coup, which brought the National Council for the Safeguard of the Homeland to power, and we know has essentially changed the map in a big way in terms of that region. In the background, reports have also started to circulate in US media that Trump is considering military action against Mali to target these same groups that the Malian armed forces are currently battling. So to break all of this down and to understand what's happening in the region, we are lucky to once again be joined by David Hundeyin, Nigerian investigative journalist and author. David, thank you so much for coming back here on BT Live.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Mali continues to fight back against these attacks from JNIM and FLA, and it has said that it has already managed to neutralize the attacks last week. Where do things stand now? Why are we seeing this increase in terror attacks in Mali?
So the strategy by the so-called terrorists seems to have shifted from these large-scale wave attacks, these attempted conventional military attacks, which they've been attempting over the past few months, to a more asymmetric style, a more sort of familiar terrorist style, where they do these sort of several hit and run attacks that are very sort of difficult to pinpoint. One of their favorite tactics now, which is kind of similar to the tactics being deployed uh, in Russia by the Ukrainian forces, is to target critical infrastructure or trade routes, anything that makes regular civilian life possible gets targeted. So one of their primary targets now, for example, is fuel convoys. So convoys of fuel tankers bringing petrol or diesel into the capital, as Mako. So I think last week there was a major there was a major operation by the Malian armed forces to escort, I believe, 900 fuel tankers into the capital. So something as simple as the movement of fuel from the border to the capital, which should be a regular, unspectacular economic phenomenon, has now become a regular military operation now, just to make that happen. Because these groups, I think, have realized that going toe to toe with the national military, which obviously has help from Russia's Africa Corps, isn't really going to work. Those attempts have failed dismally. So now they've sort of shifted focus and they're going after things that make regular life possible. The strategy, to my eyes, seems to be that even if they're not actively defeating the army, even if they're not gaining territory, even if they're not winning, gaining their objectives, if they can squeeze the people enough and make regular life as inconvenient and difficult as possible, then the hope is that the people will then rise up against the government. The government itself will then lose legitimacy. So they're going after everything that will make such life possible. They're going after power stations. Well, they're attempting to do that. They're going after fuel convoys. They're after regular traders who are shifting goods from one part of the country to another. Those are the tactics now to try to stop life from happening. So the idea is to stretch the military as much as physically possible, because they've realized that sending 10,000 men to carry out an attack isn't going to make a difference because they're just not on the same level. But if you can carry out 1,000 different attacks in a relatively short space of time across a distributed area, then it's, even if it doesn't materially change the actual balance of power on the battlefield, the hope is that it introduces fear, uncertainty, and doubt in the people at a sufficient amplitude as to discredit the government.
Hmm.
David, as Mali continues to fight to stabilize the country amidst these attacks, reports have surfaced that the U.S., as we mentioned, is considering a military action against JNIM in Mali. What would it mean for the US to militarily intervene, given that Mali's military alliance with the AES and the cooperation it has with Russia's Africa Corps?
So, to my eyes, the only purpose of doing such a thing would be to attempt to narratively discredit Russia. Um, there doesn't really seem to be, to my eyes anyway, there doesn't really seem to be any material benefit to the U.S. for from getting involved in this. It's quite visible to everyone that compared to the situation when the French and the Americans were on the ground and were in charge in this region, the security situation has actually improved very significantly. There's data backing this up. Attempting to insert the U.S. military now um, serves no point, especially at a time when the Sahelian governments have made it very clear that they do not want Western military boots on their soil. So sending in a couple of airstrikes, to my mind, will serve the same purpose that sending those airstrikes to Nigeria next door did, which was basically to prove a point that we are the big dogs and we can do what we want. And just like in Nigeria, where those airstrikes didn't actually accomplish anything, they maybe terrified a few farmers and scattered a bit of farmland here and there, but didn't really accomplish anything materially. I think that would be the same thing that would happen in Mali. The entire point of such an airstrike would be to demonstrate to the Sahelian government that the US can still do what it wants in the region, and to basically pull the pants of the Russians down to their knees or something. It's just proving a narrative point. Materially, it's not accomplishing anything, but unfortunately, that seems to be the exact sort of thing that the US excels at, because narrative warfare appears to be the core strength of the American strategy now.
And, at the same time, there have been reports of attacks taking place in Niger. So are these sort of attacks something that only AES nations are facing? And, you said that the increase in these attacks in Mali has to do with this shift in strategy of just kind of doing this war of attrition. But why is it that, now it's Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso that are all facing these attacks? Is it merely a product of kind of these regional shifts stemming from Libya, or other countries in the region facing it as well? Or is there a specific focus and targeting of these countries?
So the other countries in the region are facing attacks. I know Nigeria, for example, is definitely facing these attacks. But what sets the three Sahelian countries aside is the frequency, the sheer vehemence of these attacks. It's very clear that unlike in northern Nigeria, for example, where these attacks take place, and you can very clearly map these attacks against a geological map of resources in Nigeria, and it's very easy to tell why these attacks are happening. That basically the purpose of these attacks is to clear out swathes of land where people live and turn them into open pit mines. That's very obvious. In the Sahel, it's not for the same purpose. It appears to be for the purpose of physically dislodging a national government. So the goal of these attacks in Nigeria or in Benin or in Cote d'Ivoire is not the same as these attacks in Burkina Faso or in Mali or in Niger, where you can clearly see these terrorists in those three countries having very open and obvious coordination with Western and Ukrainian intelligence and information services. So you see the spokespeople of the so-called JNIM appearing on French national TV. You see the Ukrainian intelligence service, the GUR, coming out to openly take credit for supplying intelligence to these terrorists who then ambush the military. So there was a very popular case that happened, I think, in 2024, where a convoy of 42 Malian soldiers and I think 83 Russian soldiers of the Wagner military group then were ambushed and were killed. And the Ukrainians proudly came out on social media claiming credit for it. And then which led to a split in diplomatic relations between the Sahel and Ukraine, which still persists. So yes, these attacks are happening elsewhere, but not at the same amplitude and not for the same purpose. It's clear that what is happening in the Sahel is not terrorism per se. What is happening is proxy warfare for the purpose of taking out an entire state.
And I just wanted to follow up on something you said, David. You spoke about kind of the Ukraine connection. Can you elaborate a bit on that? We know that Russia's Africa corps are in some of these countries and act side by side with their armed forces. How is Ukraine fitting into the picture, and especially in these attacks that they're facing?
So just like how it recently made an attempt to involve Iran in the Ukrainian war, to involve itself in the Iranian war, Ukraine has been pursuing similar things in the Sahel for quite a while, because there appears to be this idea that wherever the Russians are engaged on the planet, somehow Ukraine has no reason to be there. So I mentioned what they've been doing in Burkina Faso and in Mali. And it's not just that. They've also been carrying out some sort of attempted diplomatic sabotage. So last year, for example, for reference here, Burkina Faso and Ghana are very, very close diplomatic and trade allies. In fact, Ghana is the de facto port for Burkina Faso. They share about 600 kilometers of border, and they have a historically very decent relationship. Now, last year, the Ukrainian president, I think it was in July last year, put out a tweet claiming that the Ghanaian president, John Mahama, they just come off a call with John Mahama. John Mahama has agreed to purchase defense equipment from Ukraine. He's agreed to buy Ukrainian drones, and he's agreed to station Ukrainian soldiers on Ghana's border to protect Ghana's border. Now, bear in mind that the border in question is a border with a country which is basically allied with Russia. So what is the goal of putting out such a statement? And then the Ghanaian foreign ministry had to come out and clarify that no such agreement had been reached, that yes, the president did have a conversation with Mr. Zelensky, but Mr. Zelensky basically lied, and there was no such agreement that was reached. The entire purpose of putting that out there was to create a diplomatic schism, to create distrust between Ghana and Burkina Faso, right? So that's the extent to which Ukraine has attempted to involve itself, not just in the military, on the battlefield, but even in the politics of countries on the other side of the world.
Wow. Sorry, I'm just sort of blown away. That's quite ambitious on part of Ukraine. I did not know there was I didn't know there was a growing Ukrainian footprint in Africa. Just absolutely insane.
It would seem to make little sense, but it seems like they genuinely fancy themselves as a player on the board in the same manner as the US or Russia. Seems insane to me, but that's genuinely how they seem to see themselves.
Well, before we let you go, David, we did want to ask you where Nigeria fits into all of this. And because Sunday, of course, was the anniversary of the patriotic coup in Niger in 2023. And we know this, act triggered a regional crisis and almost saw Nigeria invade Niger on the behest of ECOWAS. So where do relations stand today? How does the Nigerian state relate to AES, and how do the people perceive it? Because we know that invasion was stopped because the Nigerian Congress actually prohibited the government from going forward with this. So where do those relations stand today?
Like, to answer that question, I should actually provide some background on what actually happened that stopped that invasion. When the instruction was given for the Nigerian military to invade Niger, it was an illegal order, because the law in Nigeria states that Nigerian military cannot be deployed outside Nigeria without Senate approval. And the president was intending to do it without approval, so that by the time the engagement has already begun, then he's basically, circumvented the Senate. You can't stop a war once it started. And someone within the chain of command actually leaked the attack instructions from defense headquarters to me. And I put it out on social media, and it became a whole thing. And then the Senate became aware, and that's partly what led to the stoppage of that thing. And by the way, for all my troubles, I was accused of treason, and I'm apparently a wanted man in Nigeria. Treason, by the way, is a capital offense in Nigeria. It carries the death penalty. So, there you go. Now, what role is Nigeria playing currently? Unfortunately, since 2023, Nigeria's role has not changed in any way. Nigeria, it gives me absolutely no pleasure to say this as a Nigerian, but Nigeria is basically an imperial battering ram in West Africa. It's like the headquarters of US and French imperialism in West Africa now, to all intents and purposes. It historically is a country which has wielded influence as the sort of hegemon of the region. It's a country which used to fund African liberation movements. It's a country which provided material support and passports and stuff like that to people like Nelson Mandela, Steve Biko. Nowadays, it's just a complete shadow of itself, and it's being used by the US State Department as basically a departmental office in US foreign policy for West Africa. It's very unfortunate. We saw what happened at the start of the year when there was an attempted coup in Niger, and the French president basically boasted on Twitter that he sicked the Nigerian Air Force on them, because that's basically what happened. So you have the Nigerian Air Force using American jets, the so-called A-24 Super Tucano jets, to bomb a neighboring country. Jets which it doesn't use in its own counterterrorism effort on its own soil was used to bomb Benin. Sorry. So that's where Nigeria is at. Now, on the bright side, I do have to say that this is very much a case of a state versus its people. Because the majority of the Nigerian people, I have to stress this, do not agree with this political that Nigeria has taken. Just a couple of weeks ago, we did a story here at Spearhead. There was a social media content creator who I think he did a TikTok video where he alluded to that the AES is making material progress in uplifting the living standards of people in Sahel versus the supposedly democratic Nigerian governments. And what is the point of the democracy if it's not delivering any material benefits to the people? And he was immediately arrested by the secret police in Nigeria. He's still in detention. Right. So the Nigerian state has this reflexive defensiveness anytime the AES is mentioned. Nigerian state seems to see the AES as like a mortal enemy. Whereas the Nigerian people, it must be said, generally have a very, very favorable opinion of the AES, particularly of Burkina Faso. So I believe that Nigeria is heading to a political tipping point. I don't know exactly when. I don't have a crystal ball, but Nigeria is heading to a political tipping point where the state is going to get into a showdown with its people, and the entire political future of Nigeria is going to be up for grabs.
Well, we are so lucky that we have you as a friend of the show and of Breakthrough News, because we will definitely be turning to you to understand those developments. David Hundeyin, investigative journalist and founder of the Spearhead. Also, congratulations on stopping a regional war. Has to be said. Thank you so much once again for joining us here on BT Live and breaking down these very crucial issues.
Thank you very much for having me.